to work in the U.S. in 2022 is higher. Pinnacle's openings include LPNs, RNs, and more. Unlimited PTO for salaried employees means you take care of their patients and they take care of you. Visit PinnacleHomeCare.net or the iHeart Career Fair August 8th at the Embassy Suites near USS. Pinnacle Home Care, changing lives through the art of the experience.
I like to take the global and the national stories and go to local, and then go to local to national to global. All these things connect together. And joining us now is someone who is running for Congress, someone here in the local Central Florida community where we're broadcasting from, Wendy Schmeling, who's running for District 18 for U.S. Congress. How you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Doing great. It's great having you on the show, and I wanted to have you on. I visited your website, wendyschmeling.com. It says, "Make education great again." Why do you use that as your tagline running for Congress?
So it's actually wendyschmeling.org, but yes, thank you for that. So the tagline is because I'm a teacher. I've been a teacher for 20 years, and I'm sick and tired of seeing our children indoctrinated across America. We live in the free state of Florida, and we have the great Governor DeSantis, who has kept us safe from a lot of the ilk that's out there. But unfortunately, we cannot say the same for our other friends in our other states. And even though we do have the governor pushing back on a lot of things, there's still some rogue teachers and rogue school boards and, things still coming down that pipeline from the federal Department of Education. So I want to abolish the Department of Education and return education to where it rightfully belongs, which is to the states. It's because it's not in the Constitution. Education is not in the Constitution. It falls to the 9th and 10th Amendments of the Constitution, which are we the people, popular sovereignty, number 9, and then it's a states' rights issue through the 10th Amendment.
So, do you see this as the issue that is most concerning to voters in the District 18?
So it's not the top of the list, but it is in the top 3. District 18 encompasses 8 different counties, and I was speaking in Sebring last night, which is in Highlands County, and they are having a lot of problems with their school system, very similar to the Polk County school system, which is where I teach, with illicit books and illicit teachings that should not be happening in the classroom. I mean, there can be general, one of the school board candidates was speaking last night in Highlands County about, okay, we can do general reproduction in terms of education with students, just the basic science of it all, but we do not need to be indoctrinating kids and making them think, okay, today you could be a different gender, tomorrow you can be something else. You can go get gender reassignment surgery without your parents' consent. All of the confusion that's being put into our children's minds, that's got to stop. And it's happening. There's cases of it happening in the state of Florida. Even though, again, we have a great governor who's pushing back on it, but you've still got rogue situations where it's happening, and we need to stop it. And then it's happening even worse outside of our state.
Is there, I noticed that the Polk County School District, you mentioned that's where you teach, they had a proclamation for LGBTQ. I don't think they included, it's supposed to be LGBTQIA+. I don't think they're completely politically correct enough if they didn't use this IA+ part. But I just thought about that as I'm like, wait a second, maybe they didn't do their job there on that one. But they said that it's the language I was reading it, and it says that, the transgender, this is gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, and queer students within Polk County. And it says that they face ongoing discrimination based on their innate status. And I thought about this. I said, wait a second. So you're speaking as a school board on behalf of little kids, kindergartners, right? And don't they do it?
Right.
What's the age? What's the youngest age that Polk County Schools presides over for kids? What's
so
the youngest
your
age?
kindergartners are going to be 5, but some schools have the pre-K program, so you could have kids as young as 4. Yeah.
So you got kids as young as 4, And this publicly accountable agency is supposed to be working to school children. They're failing at that part. Their grades are going down, performance is going down, but they are proclaiming as an official proclamation that this is the innate status, includes transgender for 4-year-olds? Or was that proclamation for, 18-year-old kids, in the high school age? No, that was for all of them. So they're making a very radical, extremist, fringe, political proclamation saying, we proclaim this allegiance to this gender identity. They use the word, they affirm, it says, we celebrate all people are respected, valued, and affirmed, inclusive of their sexual orientation, gender identity, and gender expression. The word gender identity comes from a bizarre character named John Money, who was a sexologist, psychologist from New Zealand. He practiced at Johns Hopkins University, and he coined the term gender identity, which is where they're getting that term. This is a guy who says, quote, in 1991 in a journal, John Money says, if I were to see the case of a boy aged 10 or 11 who's intensely erotically attracted towards a man in his 20s or 30s, if the relationship is totally mutual and the bonding is genuinely totally mutual, then I would not call it pathological in any way. So they're using language that this man created, and they're saying we proclaim this as an innate status for 4-year-olds and up. How can they do this? How did we get here?
We got here because I think a lot of parents were asleep at the wheel. And I say that as non-judgmentally as possible because, let's face it, we've, especially in this day and age, you've got people working, 2-3 jobs just to survive, just to put food on the table. And some of your lower socioeconomic statuses in your homes, you've got single parents that literally have to work 2 and 3 jobs to survive. So you've got, unfortunately, children that are babysitting themselves, and then, you've got parents that cannot make it to school board meetings because of their work hours. And, of course, school boards don't make it easy. They make the meeting times, a lot of times, in the middle of the day when your average parents are working. And, of course, that's by design. When are parents going to be able to get to those school board meetings if they're working? So what's happening is they basically pushed parents out at the school board level. They've also pushed parents out when it comes to those organizations at school, like it's supposed to be PTO, parent-teacher organization, but they're kind of shoving the parents out of that. And then, of course, coupled with this scare in society that, everybody has to be vetted that comes into your schools, because of, school shooter instances, which, obviously we need to keep our children safe from that. But there used to be a time when parents could just go to the school and didn't have to, run through an act of Congress to be able to get into their child's school. Now you have to basically have an appointment, you have to be fingerprinted, you have to do all these things, and then you can't stay very long. And so basically I would call it the pushing out of the parents. And so, they're now able to come alongside and say, oh, well, I know what's best for you, to a child who's still developing. We all know that children, their brains are not fully developed. Everything's developing up into the 20s. So you're going to prey on a child and say, oh, this is how you feel today. Okay, let's do something about that. And I'm sure you've seen the research, David, that the kids that have gender reassignments, they regret it. They actually have deeper bouts of depression. They have stronger affinity to commit suicide because, they want to say it's innate, right? That you're born that way. Then why does it fluctuate and balance out after young people go through, that wonderful change of life called puberty? Hormones go crazy in a teen and teenager's body, and then they balance back out. And so this gender reassignment stuff, what we don't need any of that, because what happens is the hormones balance out over time, through that process of puberty. And that's what the research shows. But, you mess with that, you mess with, the way God made people, and then now there's another thing that adds to that pile. So then, you've got this mental illness that can go with it, that gender dysphoria, which basically has been classified as mental illness. So they're really doing our kids a disservice. And and keeping parents out of it. I was at the Moms for Liberty conference about a couple weeks ago, and they showed that this is the Biden agenda through the HHS, through Health and Human Services, is to get parents, shove parents to the wayside, have a school official step in and take over the role of the parent and reassign, get your kids gender reassignment surgeries and basically label parents as terrorists or put them on a watch list if they are, if they're trying to interfere with their own child, not getting these types of things done to them. It's scary. It's scary.
All this stuff comes from this John Money figure, and he did a famous study with a guy named David Reimer who had a botched circumcision at 6-month-old, and John Money in his lab was able to convince the parents to let him try to do hormone therapy and all kinds of brainwashing for this kid. This kid was put into experiments by John Money, including replicating sexual intercourse with his twin brother. He was he was given pornography. This is what John Money did. This is the founder of what the Polk County School Board is celebrating when they use the term gender identity as an innate status. If it wasn't for John Money's perverse work, they wouldn't be mouthing that kind of rhetoric right now. Unfortunately, David Reimer killed himself because of what John Money did in his sick, sadistic experimentation. Polk County schools should not be celebrating this man's work. Let's continue in just a moment, live on A Neighbor's Choice. Who is your neighbor? Dave and Wally are team drivers for Oakley Transport. One day, they came across a very serious accident on the highway. Some might pass on by, but Dave and Wally saw there was no time to waste. They jumped into action and saved 2 people's lives with moments to spare. That's the kind of courageous love we need more of today. It reflects the respected culture Oakley Transport develops with their driving professionals. CDLA licensed drivers. Join Oakley Transport today for a rewarding career. Visit oakleytransport.com. That's oakleytransport.com. Neighbor's Choice returns. I'm David Bernowski. I'm here with Wendy Schmeling, who's running for U.S. Congress in District 18 in Central Florida. And she wants to make education great again, according to her website. So, Wendy, I want to ask you, how do you see the Department of Education fomenting so much of this radical social experimentation on kids? How is the Department of Education's existence tied to that trend?
That's a great question. So a lot of people don't realize that the education system was hijacked by the federal government in the year 1916. And then at that time, there was a communist manifesto that was produced to basically indoctrinate our children at that point. And it includes everything from rewriting our history to this gender issue, to the sexual identity issue, to indoctrinating our children with sex education that is not, like I said, it's not your normal just biology 101 birds and bees talk. It's much deeper, much more deviant. And then some years later, you get the creation of the Department of Education, and they're just peddling this stuff. They're peddling this, they're peddling CRT, critical race theory, and it's coming down the pipe. And Betsy DeVos, who was our former Secretary of Education, has even said we need to abolish the Department of Education. There's some members of Congress that are saying we need to abolish the Department of Education, because the bottom line is, when education was started in this nation, before we were even a nation, people may not know this, David, because I'm a history teacher, so I'll share this briefly, but our first education systems were created in the 1630s. I did not misquote that, the 1630s, because, of course, the first pilgrim groups that arrived here in 1607 and Plymouth Rock was 1620. When they came, they had children, and they had to educate their children, right? And so as the population grew, hey, we need to educate our children. And so schools started back then, even before the nation was founded. And schools were, at that time, a privatized system. And it was an agreement, it was a contract between the parents of a town or village and the teacher that they hired. And that's where that one-room schoolhouse came into play. And we had students, educated on the basics, reading, writing, arithmetic, Bible for morality, that you did not have all of this fluff and this ilk that we don't need. And then, of course, in the 1920s, in the progressive era in this country, all of our history books were rewritten. There was a rewrite on everything. 4 progressive authors rewrote our entire history and took God out of the mix. They took our providential history out of the mix. They rewrote it based on an economic stance as opposed to what really happened. So, like, for example, one thing I can tell you that's in the history books today, to this date in 2022, is the number one cause for the American Revolution was taxation without representation. That is not the number one cause. That's like cause number 17 out of a list of 26 long trains of abuses and usurpations against the King of England. That's the least of the sins that the King of England committed against the American colonists. But yet it's cited because it's an economic factor, and the whole system of education now is focused on the economics and globalism. And it's taken everything just way out of context.
So what about, let's go through some of the other issues that are facing the nation right now. If you're elected to U.S. Congress, you're going to be dealing with the economy and inflation.
Yes.
I happen to believe, if we're reading the Constitution, that there is no constitutional basis to have a Federal Reserve System, which has this Federal Reserve Board of private bank members. This is a quasi-government, quasi-private, weird mutation. And the Constitution says Congress shall coin the money and regulate the value thereof. I don't see where it says Congress can create some kind of group that has all these giant banks having their little preferential treatment for each other. What would you do with the inflation issue?
Yeah, so you're absolutely right about that. It's another case of government overreach, big government reaching into our pockets, literally. So we need to cut all spending. We need to look at abolishing the Federal Reserve because, as you've stated, so this is what the Congress uses. It's called the necessary and proper clause. They use it as a blank check to write new bits and bobs of legislation to put new things into place that should not be there. So my campaign is about stopping that government overreach into our local lives, shrinking down government, getting back to the state and local level as it was intended by our founding fathers. And a lot of the issues they're not in the Constitution. Basically, folks, when they read the Constitution, they'll see a lot of things are not in the Constitution that the federal government is telling us they have a right to do. Marriage is one of those cases. Abortion is one of those cases. Education, and like you just said, this creating of the Federal Reserve. So we need to cut spending severely. We need to look at even the salaries of members of Congress and the fact that, people are still getting paid, long after they've left office. We need to look at what's happening with that because that's not right. When we've got a Congress that is spending, like they're writing blank checks, they're hemorrhaging blank checks here, like nobody's business. I mean, $1.5 trillion. One of my opponents, who declares himself the incumbent of District 18, which, by the way, He's not the incumbent of District 18. He's the incumbent of old District 15. But he voted, it's public record. I'd like to tell your listeners to go to house.gov and look up the clerk's records. Go to house.gov. Don't go anywhere else, to Ballotpedia or any of those other places, right? Got to go to the source, like I tell my students, and look at the voting record of the congressional members that people have, and see where they stand. Because my opponent voted for $1.5 trillion. He voted with the Democrats. He's a Republican in name only, so he's a rhino. He voted for the $1.5 trillion, which is it's just over $11,000 for every voter in America. And he joined the Democrats and voted for that. So that's wasteful, irresponsible fiscal spending. It's government overreach.
Another thing I
not
saw.
only did he do that, yeah, go ahead.
Another thing I saw, this incumbent, or you're saying he's not the incumbent, but Scott Franklin, who you're running against,
that's him.
He voted for the Ukraine money laundering bill. I mean, we just read this story here in the gray zone just before, where Zelensky is letting loose these prisoners who have been imprisoned for sadistic torture and rape of minors. Zelensky's letting them loose, right? And these people, Zelensky's government has, they've published a blacklist of foreign journalists and academics. They've banned virtually all of his political opposition, shutting down oppositional media, and going after people like Senator Rand Paul because he's opposed involvement. But there you go. Scott Franklin is supporting that $40 billion money, which is going to go to corrupt oligarchs. And of course, Russia has their corrupt oligarchs battling for control over Ukraine. But why should we be destroying our dollar for these far-off oligarchs?
We shouldn't. You're absolutely correct. And it was a total of $53 billion. The first package was, I think, $13 billion, and the last one was $40. So $53 billion on top of this runaway inflation that we have, on top of supply chain crisis where mamas can't find baby formula, women cannot find feminine hygiene products, gas is through the roof. We've got money to burn. We've got money to literally spend overseas and wipe our hands and say, oh, I didn't do that, because that's his stance. I didn't do that. That's a lie. I didn't. Well, look at his record. Look at his record. Go to house.gov and look at his record. I am not going to be fiscally irresponsible like that. I grew up in a middle-class home. I work as a teacher. And listen, teachers don't make a lot of money. I make $52,000 a year, and that's after teaching 20 years with not just a bachelor's, but a master's degree plus. Like, I have a master's plus 18, so I can teach as an adjunct professor at the college level. And I'm making $52,000 a year, David. I'm not ashamed to tell people that, because I know the value of a dollar. And I'm not going to go and waste. I don't want my money wasted, so I'm not going to go waste other people's money. My mom is a senior citizen living on a fixed income. And I know our seniors are hurting right now. We've got a huge population of seniors in Polk County and in all areas of District 18. They can't even make their monthly rent and their monthly mortgage payments, let alone put groceries on the table. We've got to rein in this spending.
Well, very good. Wendy, I really like the things you're saying here. most electrifying show in media, and I meant that, and a surge of electricity from a thunderstorm here in Central Florida. Messed up my mic for just a moment, but we're still back, ready to kick some tail for Liberty. I want you to check out Wendy Schmelling's website. Go to wendyschmelling.org for more information. I'm David Gronowski. Godspeed.